Welcome to On the Chain.
All right. So we're gonna dig into this a little bit. We're gonna dissect it, kind of dive through as much as we can. Now, the idea here in the title of this draft, to provide full responsible financial innovation and to bring digital assets fully within the regulatory parameter. Now, going through the Senate, so be it enacted by Senate and the House of Reps of the U.S. Now, there's obviously quite a bit that's going to be in here. This is actually 70 pages. And as you go through all the sections of the bill, like I said, pretty much the entire bill has to do with digital asset and normalizing digital asset. Look at that. We got ex Ropey over here from Michigan. What is up? Got Mohammed coming in from Ohio. What is going on? So Bird Dog from the magnetic north. Wow, Mount Meru. So, all right. So what do we got here? We got responsible taxation. So let's go through some of these sections. Now, what's interesting about the draft of this bill is that it does include some components that we saw within the Token Taxonomy Act that really address the Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. Now, those are really, really critical because that's also the beginning of when we start to really identify certain offerings as securities and also giving some authority over to the SEC. And within this bill, we're also seeing great. We're also seeing some other interesting items that have to do with oh, anyhow, okay. So let's get it. So I was going to say you have to do with taxation, and that becomes kind of an important part as well, because if we think about this idea of moving from one crypto to the other, and this is something also addressed within the Token Taxonomy Act, but this really is important, because as we start seeing that maybe some of the authority is moved over to the CFTC, whereas some of the authority may be in the hands of the SEC, but probably, mostly within the CFTC. So we got to go through it. So that's a responsible security innovation, responsible commodities innovation, and we start getting in. Look at this revision of the term futures commission. Now, this isn't going to necessarily, when we look at all these sections, they won't all necessarily make it into the final bill. But when we see this final draft, they've really broken up. Now, I saw one thing in here, and as we get into section 6, and you kind of read into this, and I thought it was interesting that this was actually put into. See if I can highlight. There we go. So I thought this was really interesting that this was put into this bill, because as we look at it, right, responsible payment innovation, but here part of it is a study on the creation of an official digital currency by who? By China. So we have the digital yuan, and then they further get into use of official digital currency of the People's Republic of China on government devices, and they talk about tracking, then all the different things that are happening. And it becomes really, really important that they are actually looking at this digital currency, because there's a significant distinction, as we all know, between a digital currency and a digital asset. So a digital currency, which would be like the digital yuan, or maybe a CFTC, which is completely not the CFTC, a CBDC, a central bank digital currency. So when we start seeing it centralized in the hands of certain powers, especially, when we look at what can a government do with the powers that they are then granted within that digital currency from a tracking perspective and a control perspective. So that has to be addressed, and they have to really identify. And then you have to really look, is the U.S. also emboldened to then work with this digital yuan that gets presented? All right. So here we have responsible banking innovation, responsible interagency coordination. So here is really where you start looking at the different agencies actually working with one another. So it's not just the SEC with a monopoly on the control. of this item. And then we get into, okay, so now they get into certain definitions here. So we understand, what is the Securities Exchange Act of 1934? What's the Securities Act of 1933? What is, they might even get into the IRS code, like in the Token Taxonomy Act. They addressed an IRS code from 1986. Some of it has to do with retirement funds and where you can put your money, etc. So here we get more definition. Let's see here, and I think this is important also because they're really defining within the bill, giving a clear definition, right, of what is DLT, what is distributed ledger technology, right? That's important. You have to define it. What is a digital asset intermediary, right? This is also important. What is a digital asset, right? I mean, we could take it for granted that, hey, let's understand it, but here, are going to define what a digital asset is. They're going to define a digital asset intermediary. So let's look at how they defined digital asset and kind of move on from there. But here it says, it means a natively electronic asset that confers economic proprietary access powers and is recorded using cryptographically secured distributed ledger tech or any similar analog, and includes virtual currency and payment stable coins, and may comprise other financial assets such as ancillary assets and securities. So it's pretty broad, range of the entire digital asset space. Then they get into, okay, digital asset intermediary. What is DLT? What is a payment stablecoin? So maybe there's this big push right now for stablecoins. Now we move into a stablecoin, maybe like USDC or others. So let's see. So here they define, what is a stablecoin? It's a digital asset that is denominated or pegged to the value of ledger tender as described in section 5103, or in the legal tender of a foreign country, excluding cases in which foreign country has adopted virtual currency as legal tender, is accompanied by a statement from the issuer or the reasonable expectation of users that the denominated or pegged value set forth in subparagraph A will be maintained and be available upon redemption, derives value from or is backed by one or more underlying finance. So this is really great that, they go in. Why do they have to go and define this? Because it no longer is ambiguous. At this point, it's very, very clear, what all of these different things that we might take for granted, but the majority of the people in Washington are relatively clueless on what all of these things mean. We go down into virtual currency. And so this is really, great, within this draft bill that they get into, all of these different elements, right down into, responsible taxation, not the crazy taxation that's just going to be randomized and maybe tax on every single transaction. Now, this is what's interesting, is that they took this this idea, which is, here it is, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. This is taken from the Token Taxonomy Act. So if we look through this new draft bill, there's a lot of legislation in here that is taken from what Warren Davidson, put into this. So this is really great. Uh, Oh, and Darren Soto as well. So we have Darren Soto from Orlando, Democrat, and Warren Davidson out of Ohio, Republican. So now we're really seeing, a lot of these elements, a lot of the good elements. So this is really amazing. But here, okay, in general, gross income of an individual shall not include gain by reason of changes in exchange rates from the disposition of digital assets in a personal transaction, as such term defined. Obviously, I got to go and read that, but here it says, the preceding sentence shall not apply if the gain which would otherwise be recognized on the transaction exceeds. So basically, they're saying, in that transaction, if it's a personal transaction and your gain is around $600 in that individual transaction, there will be no, it's not a taxable event, which is, there has to be a starting point. Obviously, we'd like it to be bigger, but they understand that in these small transactions, you go to buy something, or you're moving from one asset to another. How is it that you're taxed every single time? So they really are trying to understand and find, the best solution. Might not be the best for us, but at least it's moving in a direction, where there's some clarity and some definition to it. Now let's go on. Retirement account treatment of digital assets. This also was taken out of the Token Taxonomy Act, and another item that actually is really important. It addresses the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, rules relating to digital assets. So they want to talk about how do you put that into and invest in from a retirement perspective. Obviously, we have to understand, brokers and how that's all treated. Uh, Decentralized autonomous organizations, if we look at the DAOs. So here we get into, clarification what their activities are, tax treatment of digital asset lending agreements. So this is also important, right? If you're lending out digital asset, and exactly how does that then relate, and how do they address, look at this, how are they going to define what a security is also? I think that's going to be critical. Implementing effective IRS guidance. We saw the conforming amendments, again, related to some of the codes that are already on the books. Responsible security innovation. And this is also key, security offerings involving ancillary assets. So we want to make sure that it's very clearly defined, because the SEC, again, doesn't just get to decide. So Gary Gensler running around saying, hey, that's a security, and that's a security, and that's a security. He doesn't get to do that because he doesn't write the law. The SEC gets to abide by, and they are the investigative unit side of everything, but they don't write the laws. They can then take it, say, okay, we're going to take the laws that you have on the books, and we're going to look for violators and violations, and we're going to understand how to look for someone who has violated the specific laws that are on the books. Now, Congress, which is both the House and the Senate, they get to write the laws, and now they are taking responsibility. Now, one thing is that the SEC with Gary Gensler does not want Congress to actually write the laws defined by them. He wants the laws to be written and defined by him from his action, from what we've seen so far, which is completely, out of control. So, as we get into, this idea of the securities, and they look at, what's an ancillary asset, again, they're looking at securities acts. Now, think about when the security laws came into place with the rise of the SEC back in 1933, 1934. So we're talking about, almost 90 years ago, right? It's coming up soon. It'll be 100 years that we've been, existing with these laws. And some of them are a little bit outdated, as we've seen, like with the Howey test. Can it be outdated when it was looking at oranges? How do you amend it? How do you add to it? And really, this is the lack of clarity is the reason for the SEC v. Ripple case. The SEC v. Ripple case would not be taking place right now today had there been clarity, had there been a Token Taxonomy Act, or a bill like this in place that clearly defines who is responsible and defines all the terminology as we start moving forward, into this. So anyhow, this is 70 pages. We're not going to read through, every aspect of it, but I thought it was really important to kind of get a general, idea of where this is going, how this is going to protect the direction and growth within the U.S., innovation in the U.S. And, can this actually protect the direction that we're moving in? So, that's a huge question. And so now we have to see, this is just the beginning stages. They're in the draft mode. So what happens when they throw this over to Congress? So let's say it does get through the Senate, say they vote it through, and it has to go back to Congress, and they have to look at it, or to the House. What happens when they hand it to the House? Do they then just sit on it? Do they actually push it and agree and push it back to the Senate to move on for signature by the president? Does the president then sign this? Does this bill, have enough legs, between now and when the new Senate and the new Congress come in after the elections in November? So there's a lot of what ifs here, and so we'll see what's happening.
Are you down with OTC? Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when the next video drops.